So thank you everyone so much for joining us today. This is our first seminar in Academic April, which is a series of seminars devoted to understanding and preparing you for academic careers. My name's Hannah. I work in the Career Development Office. We do a whole bunch of stuff all the time to help you prepare for that next step. Many people we work with are thinking that next step might not be academia. But of course, if you're thinking that next step is academia, we are here to support you as well. Whatever that next step is, we want to make sure that you get there successfully. So this summer, I'm really excited. We have Dr. Aaron Johnson, who is an associate professor in the Department of Biochemistry and Molecular Genetics. And he's here to share some insights on how to break into academia.
All right. Yeah. Hi, everybody. Nice to see some familiar faces, also some students who are thinking kind of about the long game, but I imagine many of you are postdocs as well, thinking potentially about a faculty search in the near future. I have been faculty on campus for about 13 years now. Thank you, Zoom. When I went on the job market, I applied for positions 2 years in a row. I did some interviews and didn't get an offer my first go around. And so I think I've got a fairly traditional path, but also with some, I guess, bumps along the road or teachable moments that I hope to pass on to you guys. And the reason that I feel, and I've been doing this, I took kind of a bit of a hiatus, and a couple of my other faculty colleagues have done this, more so for our own departmental postdocs, a little more small scale. And I do recommend you going from kind of big classroom-sized information gathering and workshopping to things where you can be more one-on-one with individuals who are kind of near to your science and your career path. But I benefited a lot when I was a postdoc, even though I went to Harvard Medical School for postdoc, and I would say the framework and the structure for supporting postdocs when they were going on the job market was almost non-existent. But there were a couple of junior faculty who had just started in my department who were willing to really step up and mentor postdocs who were going out on the market like myself. So I was really lucky to have somebody, even though the person that who was my mentor was one of the most successful people I know out on the job market. She still had a lot of great tips and tricks that I used, and some of the other faculty were just starting to kind of push forward some of these workshops and seminars like I'm going to give today that try to basically lift the curtain back, take this black box that is the academic career and make some more sense of it, even though you'd think most of you have been immersed in this for a while. You know, most all of the ins and outs, but there's still a lot at every step along the way. And demystifying that is something that I think is really important to make sure everybody's got the opportunities that actually work best for them and that they can seize at the right point in their career. I also want to keep this pretty informal. We'll try to both, if anybody has any questions and they want to ask them in the middle, please feel free to raise your hand, and I'll try to remember to recite them back on Zoom so we can keep everyone engaged. That goes for Zoom too, but apologies if we miss something that pops up in the chat. Okay, this is a very basic kind of overview of what I am going to go over today. And disclaimer, this really can't be comprehensive. There's really a lot more to this process than I can go through in about an hour. So happy to answer some more questions for a bit after, although I probably need to leave around 2:15. I think that clock is still on standard time. But also happy to ask questions offline. I also highly encourage you. There are a lot of much more junior faculty or people who are much more junior than me who are faculty who have recently been hired. I've asked some of mine in my department for a few tips here, but I'm sure everybody who's done this more recently than me has even more kind of up-to-date and accurate knowledge about how they went through the process. So definitely seek out lots of advice. First thing I'm going to go over, and this is something that I added a little bit based on some more recent tools that have been developed in the field, and Hannah actually helped me out with pointing me in the direction of some of that, and realizing that part of this process for everybody is really deciding whether or not to pursue an academic career. Then I'll get into some more practical stuff. I'll try not to go too far into the weeds of what the few of you that might be thinking about applying in the next 6 months will be looking for. But some of these practical things I think can also, you can play the long game on them as well and be preparing now for things that might seem like they're in the weeds for what I'll go through and describe. Another thing that is very detailed that I'll try to take a little bit of like a summarized view of it in this particular seminar is giving you a little sense, if you've never seen one, what your typical academic job faculty application looks like, and how to stand out in what's sometimes a fairly deep pile. And then in the last bit, and I won't go into this in too much detail because these are things that you'll be, I think, thinking of later on, most likely in your process, but just give you a little bit of some of the highlights of what happens after your application goes in and gets submitted, hopefully not into the void, but into very competent hands of search committees. All right, so to start off with, deciding to pursue an academic position is something that everybody comes to at different points. Some people have thought about this since they were, in high school. I did have like some vague notions of that, but I was more interested in the science than really thinking about what the career was when I was in high school. But I did not really veer much off of at least wanting to be a biochemist for most of my training. That's definitely not the only path by far that anybody takes towards an academic career. And there are many different steps along the way when you can ask yourself some of these questions, like, is this what you want? Is this job, which you've hopefully been able to get a sense of from your mentors that you've been working with over the past 5 or 10 years, is this right for you? Is this what you want? Then timing, which can be important, is something to consider as well. And then definitely your network of support and how you actually how you see yourself through what can be a pretty challenging process if you do decide to reach out and go for, especially like a tenure track faculty position. And then I won't go too much in this talk into like alternative plans, but I think even within academia and without, there are lots of alternatives that I think we've all been thinking about more so in the last couple of months, but something that should always be on your radar as well. There's no one size fits all for anybody, and no matter how all of your mentors might be traditionalists and want you to continue down the path that they continued down and become an academic tenure track faculty, it's not for everyone. And so having alternatives, whether that be staff scientist or whether that be working at a record store, like that was my alternative, it's good to actually know that you can be satisfied in more than one thing in your life and more than one career. And you probably know plenty of people who have reinvented themselves already by this time, in their careers, even if they're as young as all you guys are. But I definitely know from my own friends that that's happened frequently. And, I am looking towards their guidance, for the future if need be, but, hopefully we all still have faculty careers to look forward to. And that's an elephant in the room that I'm not really going to discuss today too much, is current climate, because I think all of you hopefully want to hear a little bit more of the long view and have hope for the future, which I do. I do think we have the potential with all that we've done in the past to be able to skate on some thin ice in the meantime and get to a brighter future. Maybe we'll learn some things about ourselves along the way, I guess I will say. And that might be all I say about that, unless anybody has questions. Okay, so I just highlighted here what most people think of when they think of an academic career. If they know a bit about research, they think of, definitely for us, we think of the research-focused tenure track professor, which are a lot of the PIs on our campus, but a lot of us also think about the more teaching-focused tenure track teaching faculty. In reality, there are many more academic positions out there. I already named a couple, and they can expand your horizons both early on in the process or potentially later on in the process. If you've already joined an academic community and maybe you wish to kind of branch out from the path that you had been on into something that traditionally had been called non-traditional or alternative paths, but really we see our trainees going to all these different all these different positions and taking all these different paths. And I think most all of faculty these days have a more holistic view of what a successful path through academia and beyond actually looks like. Okay, timing. I guess I didn't animate this, so we're just going to go through these top bullets and then I'll talk about this tool at the bottom. Timing, and this is fairly postdoc centric. There are some faculty positions that you can apply for straight out of grad school, but they are few and far between. It is not something, apart from potentially some community colleges and certain high intensity teaching institutions. Some of this is somewhat unfair to those that just want to teach, but the bar has been set at many institutions, even when they have like a 90% teaching load, the bar has been set that a postdoc is likely to be more competitive in that pile. I don't have overly extensive data to report on that, although I think some of the ACRA stuff can give you a sense of this. But I know even from my close colleagues within the Denver metro area that I've been surprised at some of the high bar that they've set when it comes to faculty applicants who are going to teach almost 100% of the time, that they still expect them to have started, to have had at least a brief postdoc before they apply for that position. But that should not, be something that's off anybody's radar who's a grad student and thinks that a teaching position is right for them and they'd prefer not to do a postdoc. But realistically, I think that that's the most likely scenario, is that a short postdoc at a minimum is required even for that. If you're in a research track and you're aiming for a research career, you're thinking about things that will make you stand out in your application. And one of those could be that you've really made a major impact on your current field as a postdoc through high impact publication, most likely, and or some major kind of recognition that can come in different forms. Some of that can be coupled to other ways that our field these days recognize people that are on the leading edge of basically the transition from the postdoc career to the faculty career. I use that term because there is one mechanism called leading edge scholars that actually is one of a few now awards that are given to postdocs kind of late in their career that are basically highlighted as those that could be destined to make a strong impact as a junior faculty member. But you're looking for certain criteria that kind of push you out the door of your current postdoc lab into applying for jobs, and one of the major ones likely and should be something that gives you momentum to hopefully bring a current project with you into an independent career, or at least highlights your skills and your capacity to do that if you're in a circumstance where your PI is not as willing to let that project go. You've still demonstrated that through that high impact work. And high impact, I use in a very broad and general sense, and I do not mean just cell science Nature papers, although ironically, the ACRA rubric does have that as one of their potential criteria. But I will say that that's not a given, and most of our recent faculty hires in my department have a more holistic package that doesn't necessarily involve that that kind of name recognition, I guess I would say. There are plenty of other ways where you can demonstrate impact on your field that don't involve just one of those 3 journals and publishing in them. Another thing that can help give you a sign that you might be ready for an independent career is if you are thinking about and then apply for and receive a career development award. That can be a K99 or 00. That can be another K award where it's still mentored training, but really meant to recognize people that are on their way to an independent position. Oftentimes those awards can be taken with you into a faculty position, at least in part. And so those are some of the telltale signs that you may be ready, at least for the research side, if you're research focused, if you're interested in a research faculty career, that you might be ready and more competitive to apply for faculty jobs. And then I meant to animate this, but at the bottom, this is something that I didn't have access to when I was applying for faculty careers. But and I don't have the link here, but like there's a bit of information on the left here, and I can edit my slides so that we have this. And I know Hannah gave this to me, so she was the one that pointed it out. There's a tool. It's basically kind of a rubric that you can place your skills and expertise within. It probably has 20 or 25 different categories like this that you can kind of rate your level of 1 through 4, and also get a sense based on survey results of search committees and departments, academic departments, what a teaching, research/teaching or research intensive institution is looking for, like what level across these different skill categories. I think it's a real useful thing that maybe even some search committees on our campus should be thinking of incorporating to be a bit more quantitative when it comes to what we're looking for, to make a more equitable search for our candidates. Although some of this does come down to very wide-ranging criteria that are sometimes hard to quantify when it comes to who the right fit is for selecting an interviewee from an application pile. All right. So yeah, apart from some of the tools that you use to kind of decide when the timing is right, support networks come in many different forms, and you really want to use every last one that you have available to you, or that you can form, to be able to get you through what can be kind of a grueling process. In some ways, grueling in different ways, depending on whether it's going well or it's not going so well. Those can be obviously professional networks of support. Your primary one could be, but doesn't have to be, your postdoc mentor at the job application point. They, in theory, have done most of their job already in getting you to that point. Some of them are ready to help into the next point beyond writing a great recommendation letter. Others like to step back and let you take the lead, and there is good reason for both of those, I guess I would say, and most people kind of balance that out and meet somewhere in the middle where they're not pulling all kinds of strings, but if they think that there's a great department that would be a great fit for you and you would be a great fit for them, and they have colleagues in that department that they might reach out into their professional network and at least put in an extra good word for you, which is part of this process, to be able to have something above the paper on occasion, to be able to basically provide additional recommendation for candidates, because it can be very difficult sometimes to split hairs over which candidate is the best fit when you're selecting a small number for interviews. And I'll get a little bit more into that process in a little bit. In addition to that primary mentor, if you have a single one, or if you have a couple, anybody that you've collaborated with can continue to support you, do the same kinds of things I just mentioned that your postdoc mentor could do. And would be obvious choices for additional letter writers if you've had a strong and successful collaboration with them. Connections, I guess, is very vague, but that's more so, I guess, professional connections that you've established through networking at conferences, for example, or through some virtual connections. One of the ones that, again, I was not privy to when I was applying and then getting started as a new PI is the new PI Slack channel, which I've been told by my junior faculty members it's great up until a point, and then it can become the deepest rabbit hole that is really hard not to be kind of overwhelmed with all of the chatter. And so I think it's good to take in doses. It can be used to kind of check in on national job searches that are public and maybe multiple people in the PI group have applied for, to kind of, if somebody hears something about, oh, they've just selected all of their interviewees, that and you haven't heard anything, you might get to know a next step that has occurred in that process before you get an official word from the search committee. A lot of times it comes with that. It's like, okay, all right, I found out from somebody else that that I'm not moving on to the next step. in the process, or you can contribute that information yourself if you're one of those select few that is moving on, for example. But that new PI Slack is still, like, people still who might have joined it 5 or 6 years ago are still active in certain conversations on that, I think, to be able to continue to grow as faculty and use professional networks to do that. And then personal, and this is going to be different for everybody, but hopefully you have some form of personal network that can help support you as well, because there will be times where you would otherwise potentially be dropping the ball on personal life in a way where you could use that support if you're, going on an interview and you're not able to kind of continue on with your carpooling duties as a parent who does that a lot, or you're needing to rearrange your schedule to be able to handle support for a family member or a friend. These are things that hopefully you can count on in this moment of need for yourself as well. All right. So yeah, timing revisited now is a little bit more of where things get into the weeds, and I'll just go through a little bit of some of the specifics when it comes to the hiring process in the US, which is different outside the US. And so I'm just going to speak to this one. I know it best, and I think if there's a better chance, I guess, probably, or there had been up until a couple of months ago, that many of you would be looking for jobs in the US. I would highly encourage you, for people who have done the faculty search in Europe, to seek them out to get more advice there, or in other parts of the country, in China, or elsewhere in the globe, basically in the world, that is outside of the country. But yeah, this is one example, the US academic hiring cycle. This has been the case for quite some time, and likely still will, although there's been some disruptions this year and a few years in the last couple of decades, where the cycle gets broken a little bit or paused. Typically, though, the US academic hiring cycle starts and peaks, or at least peaks, at the beginning of September, or in September at some point. And then it trickles down in terms of, and when I say that, I say mainly job postings that peak in the beginning of September and then trickle by February, typically. Most interviews then that are, a selection, a small percentage of the pool of applicants get invited for interviews, and these are often happening by February or March. Sometimes they start being arranged as soon as September and October, but most of them are happening by that point during this normal academic cycle in the US. And that's partly because some of the schools are actually looking to hire somebody that can start by the next academic year. And then that has kind of just created a system where everybody's kind of in sync to some degree, so that they're all getting applications are all getting eyes around the same time. And so that is partly why this hiring cycle is as it is. And then, although this isn't always the case, for those that get a job offer, most of those are happening between February and June. And definitely off-cycle can happen in the US, and it's certainly happening in other institutions that aren't hiring with some of these considerations in mind, or there hasn't been kind of a falling into line and everybody's synchronizing in terms of the application cycle. All right. I'll go quickly through this. I know these are kind of practicalities, but it's still useful even if you're early on in your career. Now is not the right day for this, but hopefully this coming September, things will have calmed down a little bit, and there will be job postings again out there that will be seen all the way through to interviews and to offers. As many of you probably know, there have been a number of cancellation of job searches that have happened through some of the disruptions in the federal transition in the last couple of months. However, there are still job postings out there, and I think it's useful when you're trying to do your legwork, or especially early on, to just read some of them and get a sense of what they look like. These three repositories, especially, Job Archive is another one, have nearly a comprehensive list of all the academic positions that are out there. They've got lots of filters too, that you can filter down to exactly, your current description of yourself. Be wary though, because the job postings and the filters sometimes don't tell the whole story of what kinds of candidates people are looking for. And I'll go into that in just a little bit. In addition to some of these public databases, postdoc office also has job postings as well. Local faculty positions for sure are things that we often can hear about, either like through advertising the postdoc office or just through word of mouth, even ahead of a public job ad. There are also emails that you've probably gotten potentially from like your department head or other faculty in your department forwarding on a job posting that may be more in your wheelhouse because it's probably a bit more within the scientific discipline. And then finally at conferences, sometimes people will put up a slide at the end of their talk that, you know, I'm on this search committee and we're, you know, looking for amazing applicants in this crowd. Seems like a really good place to advertise, for example. All right. Yeah, some of this I think related to the job posting, I'll come back to here. So this is, and I apologize for how daunting this first bullet might sound, but it's factual, I guess. There's always a question because there are frequently, for any one kind of broad search where people are casting a wide net, about 200 to 300 jobs that could potentially fit your you know, particular scientific interest, discipline, like where you're headed with that. There are usually some factors that help people whittle things down. Maybe that filter, those filters that you're putting in the search fields are already whittling you down well below 200. But I do know of people who have applied for 200 jobs and successfully gotten a faculty position from that approach. That does seem overwhelming. One of the good things is that there are some standard components to it, but it is not like applying to med school or if you're MD, PhD, where there's one general application that you can just basically click, you know, check boxes for 50 or 100 places and send the application off. It's very rare that that's an option. Yet, usually because departments like to tailor some aspects of the application, but there's a common structure to it, roughly, and that helps a lot in being able to apply to multiple positions. One question that you can ask yourself when you're applying, and this can help filter things down, is do you care where you live? Most people do, but some people are very open with their first faculty position about being able to work just about anywhere as long as some of the other boxes are checked. This can definitely widen your search and keep your net pretty wide. That can be super helpful. And then another way that you can filter things, obviously, is by what type of institution you're interested in working at. There are certain considerations that actually distinguish a med school from a high research level undergraduate campus. First and foremost, that almost all faculty at undergrad campuses have some sort of undergraduate teaching obligation, even if it's fairly minimal compared to, and kind of laughable compared to people that are doing primarily teaching at a primarily undergraduate research institution. The PUI term is used quite frequently when we're talking about small colleges and small universities that have a high teaching load and may or may not provide any opportunity for the faculty to carve out a little time for research. There are state schools, there are private schools in these categories. There are also research institutes that don't have any students, potentially, maybe not even graduate students. And there's still an NIH today. I'm sorry to be dark sometimes, people. Okay, yeah, so things to consider, things to help whittle yourself down, and then some things to kind of, and I think I go through this a little bit more in the next slide, to things to help you strategize so you're not down to like 5 applications if you actually want to cast a pretty wide net. But I'll get to that in a second. Other things that can help, and I mentioned this before, the job ad itself and the way it's written is not always the most informative and should not be your sole criteria of whether or not you're a good fit or applying for a particular position. If you've got the time, you should research the department that this job ad is coming from. And if it's a department that you otherwise see yourself as an amazing fit for, but that job ad reads like they're describing your best friend, but not you at all, that's not a time to self-select and not apply to that department. Job ads sometimes are very misleading. They can sometimes be pretty political in terms of who's on the search committee or which forces in the department kind of need to be acknowledged as, the department being very open to having, people from this discipline or that discipline be part of their faculty colleagues. And yet at the end of the day, the search committee is the one that's really whittling down the pile. And sometimes what can happen is that job search and the actual people that are selected for interviews don't look very similar. So that's where I'm saying don't over self-select. If you think it's a great place to work and could be a great fit for you, there are plenty of times where I've sent something out. It's like, this does not describe me, but I want to give it a shot. And yeah, I guess I can say at least for one place that was really front-ending plant research in the job description, I at least got an interview. I think they did end up hiring a plant person in the end, but the fact that I got an interview means that they were already more open than that job ad was telling me about the type of colleagues that they would consider, at least. Because an interview, no search committee is wasting an interview. They are only interviewing people that they are potentially very serious about based on the application. Right, there we go, don't self-select. All right, so before I get briefly into kind of the detail, like the components of an application package, just want to talk a little bit more about the search committee, who is really your first audience when it comes to applying for a job. This doesn't just apply for academic careers, but I think there are some things that are maybe a bit more niche when it comes to academic careers related to the faculty search committees. Sometimes, but not always, and this is, I think that's the disclaimer for all of these statements here. They're faculty with broad interests, but they're often just a subset of the entire faculty from a department, for sure. Sometimes there are even people from other departments that are coming in if there is a specific discipline in mind for this search, and maybe they want some extra eyes that are outside the department that are really expert in a specific discipline. Sometimes, but not always, they are screening hundreds of applications. This can seem very daunting too, but if there are hundreds of jobs out there and hundreds of applications, and there's a fairly high degree of Venn diagram overlap between the applicants and the job postings out there, that can increase your chances significantly of finding the right fit. So they oftentimes are going through multi-steps in terms of screening and triaging maybe a big pile of 500 down to 100 that will actually go through full review with their committee. So I guess this is where you do kind of have to pull out all the stops. This is not meant for you to play, I mean, you don't want to play dirty, but you are also, meant to use everything at your disposal to be able to get a job. So when that comes to, this is, Bruce and Hannah talk a lot about your professional network and networking, and as much as scientists are like you, that is something that can really help in these steps right here. If people already have some interaction with you and they are on a search committee or in a department where they really want to maybe see you join that department, they will sometimes advocate for you. And so if you know of that connection already, especially if it's genuine, if it's not just like, hey, we bumped paths at a conference, or I just, we shared LinkedIn accounts, or it was something like more superficial like that. If it was a real personal interaction where that person has a higher chance of remembering you, then, that's a very legitimate reason to go and maybe reach out to them by email and try to gain a little more information without being too nosy, but just try and get your face on their mind again. Okay. So there's a bit of writing that goes into this application package. And so here are some tips that actually cover multiple different sections of the job application. package, which I'll go through in a few slides coming up here. The first is that you almost always are trying to reach an audience that's broader than your scientific discipline. And so when you can be brief and get to the point and distill things down into clear messages that are broadly digestible and understandable from a broad audience, that is definitely an approach that's going to reach more of the committee that are all going to be voting on whether or not they extend an interview to you. Avoid sloppy mistakes. Definitely sloppy applications are you can't help but judge someone off of like the haste or the lack of care that they put into that, because that's in the back of your mind. You think, is that what their first 10 grant applications are going to look like too? And if so, then they're going to have a hard time getting funding. That may seem a little bit trivial or superficial, but it's important to get this right, especially if you're going to use it as a template to send to 50 or 100 different search committees. Definitely get multiple eyes on, especially the science portion of your writing, but also the teaching portion, if that's a significant piece of the applications that your application package and the jobs that you're applying to. Think of the search committee when you're thinking of how broad you want to ask people, like in your department, outside your department, to read your short research proposal and just ask them whether or not they got it. They think it's exciting. If English isn't your first language and you're applying, to US universities, then definitely get advice on phrasing, especially in the cover letter. I guess I would say everyone here is likely very adept at science writing already. And so it's more so kind of that professional, semi-conversational writing that you may not have as much experience with when it comes to reaching out to a search committee, that you want to basically make sure that it kind of lands well with people. Again, not necessarily fair, but you have to strategize and kind of pull out all the stops when it comes to this for sure. This one's a really important one, in my opinion. This should extend to every grant proposal you put in. Use strong language of, I will do this, I demonstrated this, not I can do this, or I would do this, or I have potentially done, shown this, or that sort of thing. This is a time to really drop those kind of more hesitant phrasings and be very direct and strong, and you deserve it. If you are ready for applying for these faculty positions, then you deserve to have that kind of strong language permeate your writing for your application package. All right, so here are the core three, I guess. Yeah, maybe I don't know how much I spend on reference letters, but I'll touch on that. That may not be in the slides. So here are the three main pieces that you generate yourself. The first one is that cover letter, like I said. Great to keep it to just the one page. Keep it with basic information. You have something that pretty much starts out, leads into every application, that kind of just orients the reader as to where you're coming from typically and at what stage you're at. Are you a fifth year postdoc? Are you a senior research associate that might have been in the lab for longer? Are you a grad student straight out of grad school? And this, I guess, again, if you are a grad student, then this would be graduate work. But in the cover letter, you should keep things very short, punchy, basically, and exciting. You're summarizing potentially 5 or more years of research in a paragraph that's about a quarter of a page. So just try to really highlight the things that a broad audience can latch onto and get excited about. And along with that strong language, don't be modest within reason. This is your time to shine yourself up and really have people get excited about you as a colleague, faculty colleague. And don't get granular when it comes to the cover letter. in another quarter page or less, you do need to summarize some future plans and why they might be novel, why you're going to stand out, why you would be that one person whose grant is being reviewed, who just stands aside and is kind of incomparable to other people if possible. Within reason, again, like we all have fields with multiple people in them, but there is usually something that's really driving you that says, I think I can actually make an impact in a novel way when you're ready to go out on the job market like this. Special considerations, a couple that I would highly encourage you to put in the cover letter, if you can, if you have secured a transitional award of some money that can come with you. If there are already specific connections that you have, either that you've established or that just because you have very similar scientific interests with faculty in the department, that can be a great way to kind of end the letter of like, I'd be really excited to be able to collaborate and engage and interact with these particular faculty members in the department. If they're not on the search committee and everything else is looking really great in terms of your application package, maybe that the search committee reaches out to those people and say like, hey, do you think these guys would be an actual good fit for the department? And so choose those suggestions well. Some of you might have what's called the two-body problem, or basically that there are you and your partner are both scientists and you're both going out on the job market at the same time. Those discussions are usually not for the initial application. Those things, you need to find a good departmental fit, and whether or not that department is excited about you. If they are, they could be willing to make something work, even if there isn't an obvious initial position available for a partner. And it's just too much to try to like start, weeding yourself out of many job applications early in the process. That is not, being cagey. There are plenty of opportunities once you interview to be able to discuss that stuff, or maybe even before, but that's kind of at your kind of comfort level in terms of when those conversations come up. All right, how are we doing on time? We are doing okay, but I do want to leave time for questions. And like I said, I'm willing to stay a little after. I will go through a few of these other things more quickly. You do put a CV in there. There are some things, if you haven't written a CV lately, that you want to do differently, definitely than a resume. And BioSketch is very kind of strict in terms of some of the components and where those things can fit. There's a bit more room to really highlight multiple things in a CV, and you want to do that carefully. Definitely, you want to put your publications close to the top of your CV. I've seen a lot of CVs where they end up on page 3 or 4, and that, if you're interested in a research career, especially, you want to put those much closer to the top of your CV. Like they should start at the end of page 1, beginning at page 2. It should be right after like honors and recognition, and after like your position, that sort of thing. Everything else could be secondary. If you're applying to a more teaching heavy position, then you have to decide, are there some teaching recognitions of teaching, like a teaching award that could be front loaded even before the publications. That's somewhat up to you, but don't leave the good stuff for too far down the CV. I have a longer set of slides on the back end that goes through almost point by point the sections that are fairly typically found on a good, strong CV. So I'll leave it at that. And some of them are just my own opinion. So take that as they come for sure. But it's from years of being on search committees and having some of these suggestions work for me anyway. All right, so the research proposal is the next component of an application package. Most of them average 3 pages as requested by the search committee. You definitely, I don't know, I'd say follow the page limit. I think I'm a rule follower, but there are definitely people who apply so broadly and they just don't tailor anything in their package, and they have the confidence that their work is going to shine even if someone is like, this is 5 pages instead of 3. I would say don't ruffle any feathers. If you've got like, you might need to make 2 or 3 versions of your research proposal, because some places will ask for a 2-page, some places will ask for a 5-page. But if you have 3 of those that you've had to go through, that's good training on how to kind of reframe your research for grant applications that you might be putting in. But yeah, you really want to make it digestible, and here are a few ways to do that, because they're often going through a lot. There's no need for a reference section, in my personal opinion. You can basically use kind of shorthand references in text that just keep things like a little bit more smooth in the reading, in my opinion. One thing, and I meant to write a little bit more on this, but one thing that has become somewhat more frequently done for these job application packages is that some search committees now are trying to anonymize the research proposal, redact all information that would be identifying of the person and the person's PI, basically to try to eliminate name recognition as a major contributor to selecting candidates to go on for interviews. So keep that in mind. You don't have to try and write the thing so that's easily redactable or anything like that, but keep it in mind that you will be evaluated more so on your kind of understanding of a field and your ideas for the future and your impact, on a field that most people will not be able to identify you based off of how you describe that. There will be very few people. Only an expert in that particular field is going to know exactly who you are. And that's great, actually. I think that more schools should be doing that. We've started doing that as best we can too, in our applications. And that's just to find the best scientist and the best science fit for the department. Not just somebody who has great name recognition and has kind of these high profile publications based on journal provenance. Okay. Use simple figures to try and give people a sense of what you're going to do. Here's an example of a page from my research proposal. It's broken up, so it's not just a block of text, and it's also fairly simple. Like, this is what we want to do to be able to do, to kind of drive our work forward. Here are some of the big questions and simple ways of describing those visually as well as in the text. And here's just a suggestion in terms of kind of the breakdown based on the page lengths that you have. Most of it's future plans. People want to know what you're going to do next, not what you have done. Yeah, and it's not just meant to be kind of like, here's my R01 that I'm going to write right when I get my faculty career. It should be bigger than that, broader than that. People want to be excited about your full faculty career to some degree. So you have to balance some details and some broad strokes. Right, this is a good one, especially if you're applying to a school that has more limited resources and you still want to propose a research program. Address how you can accomplish that at a school like that. Okay, and then teaching statement, which I bet many of you are interested in as well. This evolves a lot and is quite different depending on the in terms of its impact. It's quite different depending on the search committee and the department that you're applying to, but you can basically write one that works for most job applications. The one thing you may want to consider is if you are applying to a position that has no teaching and they want you to do 100% research, you may want to back off of some of the elaborate teaching statement. They might still ask you for a teaching statement, which seems kind of crazy, but they're probably looking more for like a mentoring statement than a teaching statement. You might want to strategically change from like, here's the flipped classroom and active learning that I'm going to do, and all these different class ideas I have. That may actually play a little bit better if it's a heavy research institute. But for the most part, if they're asking for a teaching statement, they're impressed if you've got teaching background and you've got ideas. I have a faculty colleague in my department that uses active learning a lot, and even in small graduate school teaching that we do. Yeah, this is again a little bit different depending on the job posting. Half a page may not be sufficient for many places these days. So I think this might be a little dated. I could probably stand to edit this a little bit more based on, I think there's more appreciation of teaching with a wider number of institutions and departments than there used to be. And yeah, like oftentimes suggesting something that you would be really good at teaching and be excited to teach is a way to kind of show that you're thinking about it, and maybe even plant a seed to kind of seal your own fate, kind of, or dictate your own fate when it comes to what you would actually be asked to do. Okay. I'm at least close to the hour in terms of the slides. So after you submit applications, and if you're casting a really wide net, this is usually something that happens. You do like little batches over the course of the fall. You might be doing that 3 or 4 times. Actually, one thing I wanted to, I had mentioned this, reference letters are also really important. And I mentioned a few of people that you'd probably want to be asking for reference letters. Your last person would be your PhD advisor. If you're a postdoc, it's kind of a red flag if you don't put your PhD advisor as one of the 3 reference letters, because that shows kind of your long arc and that you've been, impressing people for a long time. If there's a very good reason why your PhD advisor, that you can't ask them for a letter, either because of some bad blood or for some other reason, then you need to address that in your cover letter. I think otherwise it's a red flag. It's my personal opinion, but I think it would be very unlikely that you'd have a search committee overlook that completely. Okay, so after you submit your application, a few things could happen. You could hear back really soon, up or down, especially if they have a hard deadline of when those applications are due, and they are transparent about their process. For example, in the job posting, some job postings are really transparent about their process, and they, like clockwork, you get, you've been triaged or you're on to the next round, email communication. And some departments will never get back to you. This can happen after an interview, which is nuts, but it can happen. But definitely don't take it personally, and especially at the application level. Some departments just don't have their stuff together enough to be able to do this. They're not organized enough to be able to send out rejections. And it's surprising, but it's true. You have to be ready for rejection. I think most of us have applied to an individual fellowship or grant. Most everybody here has applied to grad school or professional school, so that rejection is likely, especially if you're pushing yourself a little bit to apply to places that are on the edge of what might be the right fit for you. So just be ready for that. That's part of the process. We do basically have to have thick skin in the field, and this is where you lean on your support network to be able to get you through a lot of those moments of rejection, especially when you thought that department was your dream job. I will say that being on the other side of it, in general, the search committee, especially if you put a really solid application in, the search committee is trying to do you a favor to kind of reorient you and move on when they are sure that your department just is not, when they are sure that their department is not the right fit for you. It's not meant to be personal. It's meant to really kind of help guide you, in theory, to find the right fit as well. Maybe a little overly optimistic, but it's a way that you can kind of tell yourself, okay, they're doing me a favor by rejecting me. Hopefully that doesn't sound like gaslighting too much. Okay, yeah. You definitely can. Some committees have the time to be able to offer you that. Some committees don't. It cannot hurt by any means to ask. Be ready for anything in terms of what you get back from them. But that can be helpful, especially if there was a blind spot in your process that it can be pointed to. Maybe it's something that's fixable in a short period of time, and you can turn it back around next cycle, and really have that be addressed. But yeah. And sometimes it's just very departmental specific. Like I said, oh, you know what? We needed to we ended up deciding that it was going to be all plant geneticists or immunologists instead of microbiologists or something like that. Okay, so if you do hear back and it's a positive communication, oftentimes a lot of departments are doing Zoom interviews first, and then will they might do that with 20 people, and then whittle down, or 20 or 15 or even 10. They most interviews for single faculty slots are something like 5 to 8 people interviewed. It's not uncommon for a department to hire multiple people at one time, and so they might have more people interviewing so that they can find the right fit. But that's oftentimes where those Zoom interviews can help to find the right fit. Especially these days, I think people are very willing to go through more Zoom interviews to try to really narrow down. Like sometimes you can tell in 5 minutes. And if it's 5 minutes in your office, then you're like, wow, we've got another, almost full 2 days of this. And I already know they're not a great fit for the department. A lot better to do that on Zoom for everybody's sake, honestly. If you do get asked to do an in-person interview, they're usually 2 days. They usually involve a seminar and a chalk talk on different days, many faculty meetings, lunch with trainees, and dinners where you're kind of expected to test your socialization with the department as well. Yeah, Hannah, I know we're at.
We've got a question from the chat.
Sure.
So Molly asks, does number of postdocs influence how you look to the committee? Does someone with 1 4-year postdoc look better than someone with 2 2-year postdocs?
It depends on the impact and the success of those 2 positions. If those were a natural progression and they were both successful, then 2 short postdocs like that would potentially not be a problem at all. If the second was extremely successful and the first one, there were maybe even addressed reasons in the application why that wasn't a good fit and wasn't successful, that could be a good fit too. 2 years, I would say, is definitely, at least for my department, a very short time in one successful postdoc for us to be considering it. And some of it's a little bit unfair, but for us to be considering it, considering that person ready to go on to be faculty. So I would say 4 years is probably the more common average minimum, especially by the time they set foot on our campus. But really, more realistically, 4 years of by the time we're reading that application, just so that there's a little bit longer arc to the research that's being done, because at least in my field, that's a little bit more common in terms of research arc, but it's very field dependent, I would say. So I don't think there's one right answer to that for sure. I would say if you're coming off of an unsuccessful second postdoc where you are not happy and you don't think you've been kind of productive in the way you wanted to be, like according to your own goals, that can be a tricky way to step forward towards an academic faculty position. But yeah, I would say there's not a stigma against multiple postdocs, and it could be exactly the right fit and make a lot of sense in terms of the progression.
And just a follow-up, how would you describe success? So would that be defined by number of papers? Do you think 1 is enough from that 2-year postdoc?
Completely up to the committee what that means. You can't count papers. So I would say counting papers is not typically done. I think it's the complete body of work. That could be 1 paper that it was impactful to the field, and you clearly see a research program for that individual blossoming from that work. Or it could be 5 papers that together impacted the field, in a way that's kind of whatever that bar is set at by the committee. So there's not one formula by any means for that. And it's not only about papers too. There are other major ways that people, sometimes it's more about the new ideas. And if that search committee is more willing to basically act like a study section, where they're actually reviewing the next thing that person wants to do, then they might, emphasize more so that this person has great ideas and a strong record, but maybe not, quite to the level of some others, but they're new ideas. are going to be much, according to us, potentially much more impactful, and lead to a more successful faculty career. Yeah, so there's no one right formula or answer for sure. I'm sure there is a search committee. There are search committees out there that count things like papers and things like that, but I wouldn't say that's the average. There's too much at stake to do stuff like that. Yeah.
Do you typically know who the search committee is when you're applying to a job, or like?
You don't always. No. Oh yeah, sorry. Do you typically know the members of the search committee when you're applying, like early stages of applying?
Like, so you said like if you like to reach out and find out more about
Yeah. There's always a contact person, it might just be an administrator at first. And then depending on that search committee's preference, they might directly connect you with the chair. They might not. It's not uncommon though for the chair to at least be listed and responsive to email if they're not overwhelmed with inquiries and things like that. Yeah. But the whole search committee is rarely listed anywhere. It's not unheard of, but it's not common. But there is definitely a means for you to at least reach out and communicate things. And if you know anybody else in the department who's willing to engage with you, that's the other way to do it. Yeah. All right. Okay, that was I think the other thing that I have here before I go to that slide that Hannah's got up now, where it's like questions that people had submitted already, but I'd rather hear from live people either on Zoom or in the room first, but I can run through a few of those if we've got time. But this is like a rough and very kind of hurried bullet point of some of the next steps that are involved if you are lucky enough to get an offer at one or more places. Startup package varies quite widely, and those numbers can actually go even below 100,000 is kind of like a minimum for somebody who's actually expected to do significant amount of research, and that can go pretty quickly depending on what other mechanisms of support an institution has. And 2 million is kind of on the upper end of standard startup packages, but there are some places that have very deep pockets that start their standard startup package a little bit higher. I would say, and I think I'm right about this, that our fairly competitive faculty startup packages, I think, are about 1.25 million, and that typically, but not always, does not include basically like taking into account like the salary support. So most startup packages offer some level of 100% salary support before you need to start bringing in a grant to help fund your salary. And that's usually 3 to 4 years of support, sometimes 5. I prefer to see I prefer to see offer letters that don't include however much that would cost in the startup package offer number, just because that doesn't help you understand how much you have for resources, I guess I would say, until you do the subtraction, which we can all do math, but still. Yeah.
Is this different between research faculty and teaching?
For sure, yeah. So does it differ, like does the startup package expectation and the amount differ between research and teaching faculty positions? For sure, there are some research/teaching faculty positions at high research and high kind of expectation research institutions, where the upper end is still, not unheard of or even common. But if you're expected to do more teaching and less research, usually the startup package is proportional to that, and so it drops typically. You'd think maybe, if you're wanting me to teach a lot but still want me to do a fair amount of research, maybe you should give me more resources to hire more people to do the research for me while I'm teaching. But it doesn't often play out that way that much, unfortunately. And some heavy teaching institutions really they do not have budgets that will allow for large startup packages. So that startup package, I didn't put lower amounts in there, but there are some places that really only offer maybe $10,000 or $20,000 to be able to buy like small, like individual equipment items and like a very small amount of like research materials, just to kind of set the stage. And you hope that that spreads out over a long time. And it might be at an all undergraduate institution where they hope that you just have undergrads working for free in your lab with you, and those reagents can sustain you until maybe you get an internal pot of money for support, or you can use, you can create like an undergraduate research experience course that has a budget that can help continue that research on that sort of thing. So it's jaw-dropping how big the range is for sure, but there are sometimes very good reasons why the teaching institutions, have to, or even kind of want their heavy teaching faculty to kind of just plant a small research seed initially. If that makes sense. Okay, so when you get an offer, almost always you're invited back for a second visit, where now it's more about like them wooing you and you trying to figure out, do you want to live in the place where you've gotten an offer, and is this really the right department and campus for you? So it's you're usually meeting with people that can help you make your decision, maybe a little bit of negotiation that happens as well. Negotiations vary quite widely in terms of how welcome they are. In the departments that you're getting an offer in, they always work best, in my opinion, when they are focused on, this is an absolute need for me, or I won't have a successful research program. I need this microscope, and it's something that I think should not come out of my startup package, that sort of thing. If it's just like, I need more money because I need more money, that usually doesn't go that well. Sometimes you can go comparable and say like, hey, I've got this offer from another place, can you meet it? For equity purposes, especially if they're hiring multiple people in that department, that's not always something that they're willing to do. Even they might just say, even if they had the resources, they might sometimes say, no, we're giving the same offer to this other person, and we want everybody to come in with the same resources. But the equipment stuff is different. You oftentimes, and sometimes that's different pots of money that campus can rally as well. And you can talk about how many people could share it, all that kind of stuff. The other important consideration, and I wish I had more time to really do more research on this. Hannah had asked me to include this, and this is a really important thing, especially for international scholars. If you're applying for a tenure track or equivalent faculty position, you should be discussing with any department that gives you an offer about the special handling process for green card application, which is kind of a fast track that is feasible for a lot of tenure track faculty positions if you're offered a slot. They basically craft the job descriptions to make sure that they can hire somebody as a permanent faculty member who does not already have permanent residency or citizenship status. Yeah, Javon.
When you're international doing your training in the US and you don't really qualify for like most of the grants and training, is that something that you should be addressed on your cover letter, or?
I think there's a general awareness of it. Yeah, so repeating the question, when you are an international student and postdoc, and there are certain fellowships and awards that you're not eligible for because you're not a permanent resident or a citizen, should you address that in your job application? That was a tricky one. I would say most people should know if they're on a search committee. You could, but I think, might be a double-edged sword. It could cut one or the other way, I guess I would say. And I think I would trust most search committees to be well aware of the limitations that some of our international scholars have in terms of what they can seek out. And then anything that you do have becomes all the more impressive, I guess, because you've had that sort of bottleneck with only certain opportunities open to you. Yeah, another question in the chat.
Question in the chat from Madeline is, are there any special considerations for academic positions in this area? So in Colorado, for example, what is the market like?
Oh, that's a good question. Right now, there are a lot of hiring freezes in Colorado too, or at least pauses and slowdowns. Not every faculty position is on freeze right now on our campus, but I think anything that hadn't been initiated prior to the federal transition, anything new is probably right now being slowed down anyway. But our campus is pretty lucky, I would say, in terms of resources to be able to hire more faculty. broadly in Colorado, I'm not sure exactly how to answer the question. I guess I would say in terms of what your radar is open to, in terms of academic positions, it's if it covers every higher education institute of higher education, including places like Colorado College, all of the CU and CSU campuses, as well as DU and Metro State and some of the other four-year institutions. There's always turnover. There are people that are retiring, but when you're location limited, you are definitely opportunity limited. It's the nature of things for sure. You can work at that by establishing your networks in ways that can potentially at least make you well aware well ahead of time of jobs that open up. For those who are interested in more teaching heavy institutions, CU Denver, Metro State, Colorado College, to name just a few, offer teaching opportunities, short teaching opportunities that they welcome postdocs from our campus to do. So that's a good inroad into knowing when positions are available. But yeah, there's so much uncertainty right now. I would say, right at the very moment, it's likely a difficult market in Colorado as well, especially because we don't have a lot of we don't really have any. DU is the largest private institute of higher education, but I would say that state schools and private schools alike are both reacting right now to the climate in ways that are probably not that positive for job postings right at the moment. But again, let's look to the future. Let's hope for the best with that. Right. Any other questions from people in the room? I don't really have time to go through this. I would like to also leave fairly soon here too, but I was going to pick maybe one or two of these, and I wish I had prioritized these. These were questions that came in that Hannah had shared with me. I covered a few. People were talking about industry experience. If that's recent industry experience, leveraging that towards an academic career, that can be tricky unless you're in like a position in industry where you're already like operating a bit like a research heavy PI, which there are those, and people do go back and forth between those for sure. I think covered a little bit of like ways to combat pessimism to some degree when it comes to very popular job ads. And I certainly hope that there are maybe not 1,000 job postings. That may be a bit overly optimistic, but that we're back kind of at least the status quo in the coming years. What part of negotiation and professorship were you not prepared for? I don't know. I highlighted that one because there's a lot, of things. I think we've probably heard this before. It's the kind of nitty-gritty lab management stuff that is very new to us typically, unless you've been like effectively kind of a lab manager in one of your training positions, which I hadn't been beforehand. So just really paying more attention to every purchase that we make, knowing all the ins and outs of how to do that appropriately, even on the campus, being an actual manager of people, like where you're the first line HR supervisor. Those are things that are difficult for people that haven't had training in that. There have been a bit more effort. There has been a bit more effort put into making workshops available to people that are in transition to being a faculty member. Usually you've already gotten your faculty position and you can like focus on the next thing, which would be getting some added training to be a good PI. And so those workshops can be really helpful to learn some of those skills I just talked about. How to get a faculty career without a K-99. A K-99 is definitely not essential. I actually interviewed places that told me I actually I did come here with one, and I'm not trying to be a hypocrite about that by any means. In the first year where I interviewed for positions and didn't get an offer. I did get a great score on my K99. And when I was thinking I was close at one place, I was like, hey, like what would it look like for me to slow down my transition so I could receive this K99 and continue my postdoc long enough to then, be able to take it as a transition, because that's the requirement for these K99s. The chair of the search committee was like, you should not take that. You should start your faculty position. This is more important than waiting around for money that, is great, but at the same time, that'll just slow you down. Like, you should capitalize on your momentum. And I would say that might have been a little extreme of an example, but there are lots of faculty that are hired without K99s. And that's really not the biggest consideration that most search committees have. If you, especially at a well-resourced institution, if it's not, then it also gets a little tricky, because there's this sort of like inflection point where some not as well-resourced institutions are not deemed like resourced enough for NIH to authorize the transition of the K99. So if you're interested in that, or you already have a K99, you should be thinking of, when you're applying for jobs, making sure that a match is actually good between what NIH deems as a place where they're happy to transition your R00 award, and where it's not. So it can be actually kind of, kind of a double-edged sword with that one too. But I would say definitely not by any means a must. And I would say the majority of people that we interview in any given year are not K99 holders. We happen to have some, but that's not the top priority by any means in my department. Let's see. Things got cut off in weird ways. Yeah, again, like there's no counting when it comes to publication. Pretty open-ended, teaching-focused faculty positions. I covered a little bit of that. There might have been more to that question that got cut off. But yeah, there are lots of different. Every position is different in some ways in terms of the amount of expectations they have for all of your different kind of service, teaching, and research components. And there's no one right way to do this when you are approaching a faculty career. But I would say learn from everybody around you when it comes to all that stuff. And we are lucky enough, even though we are not a teaching undergraduate teaching institution, we're lucky enough to have a lot of great colleagues downtown, especially in the downtown campuses, who are very generous with their time in trying to open up and kind of lift back the curtain on what it looks like to be at a more teaching heavy institution. And that's probably the best advice I can give, is to really just don't let this be the one thing that you use as the playbook to apply if you're going to apply for a faculty position. There's so much so much feedback that you can get to make the process as smooth for you as possible. And hopefully you will find the right match, whether that's right down this path or another one. There's really a job out there for everybody. I do still believe that, even if there's been some dark moments in the recent past here, there is still really a job out there for everybody. And a lot of them are in some form of academic position. And we really, I want to see the academic enterprise be sustained and thrive again. And so part of that is through supporting all of you guys through that process. So I think there are a lot of people like me out there who are ready to help see it through that. So I will leave it at that.